Told me I was suffocating him, not during a fight. Not after a long day when tensions were high and people say things they don't mean. He said it on a Tuesday night while I was washing dishes, and he was standing in the kitchen doorway in a shirt I'd never seen before. Slim cut, dark blue, the kind of shirt you buy when you want someone specific to notice you. I turned off the faucet. I asked him what he meant. He said, "You're always just here. Every time I come home you're here. It's like I can't breathe." I stood there with wet hands and I didn't say anything. And he walked away like he'd just commented on the weather. That was March. I should have started making calls in March. I didn't. I told myself he was stressed. His firm had just taken on 3 new clients. He was logging 60-hour weeks. He wasn't sleeping well. I made excuses for him the way you make excuses for him the way you make excuses for someone you've built 7 years around. We'd been together since I was 26. Married at 28, the apartment was ours, the dog was ours, the plans, the house in Connecticut, maybe kids by 33, were ours. I didn't know how to stop defending a life just because the person at the center of it had started looking at me like I was an inconvenience. His name was Damien, and for a long time I believed he was a good man going through something hard. I was wrong about that. But it took me longer than it should have to understand why. The shirt should have been the first thing I paid attention to, but actually it started earlier, in January, with the gym. Damien had never been a gym person. In 7 years together, the man had maybe gone 40 times total, and half of those were because I'd dragged him. Then in January, he joined a new place in Midtown, 45 minutes from our apartment in Brooklyn, and started going 5 mornings a week before work. He bought running shoes. He bought protein powder. He started getting his hair cut every 3 weeks instead of every 6. I remember thinking, good for him. I actually thought that. I told my sister, Damien's finally taking care of himself. It's kind of nice. She made a face I didn't understand at the time. By February, he'd stopped initiating anything between us. I noticed, but I didn't push, because things had been tense, and I didn't want to start a fight. I told myself it would pass. By March, he was coming home after 9 most nights, always with a reason: client dinner, drinks with a colleague, late meeting that ran over. The reasons were always just plausible enough that I believed them. And then the suffocating comment. And then the shirt. And then one Friday in April when he said he was working late, and I walked to our favorite Thai place on Smith Street and saw his car parked outside a wine bar 4 blocks from our apartment. The lights were low inside and I couldn't see clearly through the window, but I saw him, laughing, leaning across a small table, leaning toward someone. I walked home. I made tea. I sat on the kitchen floor with the mug between my hands, and I thought very clearly, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I do anything. That was the night something shifted in me. Not rage, not heartbreak, something colder and more practical than either of those things. He came home at 11:30. I was in bed, pretending to sleep. He showered immediately, and I noted that because he'd had a late dinner only a couple of hours ago, there was no reason to shower 11:30 unless he was washing off something he didn't want me to find. He got into bed quietly. I lay there listening to him breathe, and I made myself a promise that I kept every single day after that. I would not cry. I would not confront. I would not give him any reason to move faster than I was ready for. I want to be honest. Keeping that promise was the hardest thing I have ever done. The next week, I called my friend Priya, who is a paralegal at a family law firm in Manhattan. I told her what I suspected. She didn't try to talk me out of it, or tell me I was probably wrong. She said, "Do you have a prenup?" I said yes. She said, "Get a copy of it and bring it to me." We'd signed a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. I'd wanted it because my mother had been through a brutal divorce in her 40s, and she'd raised me to understand that love and financial protection are not mutually exclusive. Damien had signed without much pushback, which I'd taken as a sign of confidence in our marriage. The prenup was straightforward. Assets brought into the marriage remained individual property. Assets acquired jointly during the marriage would be split 50-50 unless otherwise documented. Damien had a trust fund from his grandmother. I had a graphic design business I'd built from the ground up, which was worth considerably more than I'd let on in casual conversation. Priya looked it over and told me I was in a reasonably strong position. She referred me to a divorce attorney named Miss Harrington, who had an office on the Upper West Side and who charged $400 an hour and was worth every penny. Miss Harrington's first piece of advice: say nothing. Document everything. Let him keep behaving exactly as he was behaving, because every late night and every lie was building a picture that would matter later if things became contested. Her second piece of advice: open a personal checking account at a bank separate from our joint accounts and begin moving money there in small, consistent increments. Nothing dramatic enough to raise flags, but enough to establish a separate financial foundation. I opened the account the next day. I started transferring $300 every week, not from our joint savings, from my own business income, which was deposited into a business account only I had access to. I also quietly reached out to 3 of my largest clients and asked them to delay a combined $40,000 in invoices by 60 days. It was a risk, but they were longtime clients who trusted me, and I wanted that money sitting outside any account Damien could see when the time came. I became very calm. That's the thing nobody tells you. Once you stop hoping the situation will fix itself and start treating it like a problem to be solved, a strange calm settles in. I stopped waiting for him to come home. I stopped flinching when his phone lit up face down on the coffee table. I stopped asking where he'd been. He noticed. I could tell he noticed because he started watching me with this uncertain expression, like a man who expected a reaction and wasn't sure what to do when he didn't get one. Once, in early May, he asked, "Are you okay?" "You've been quiet," I said, just tired from work. "Big project?" He nodded and went back to his phone. I thought about what Miss Harrington had said. Let him keep behaving exactly as he is. He did. Her name, I eventually found out, was Gwen. She was a project manager at the same consulting firm where Damien worked, 2 levels below him in the org chart. I found out her name not through dramatic detective work, but because Damien had, at some point, gotten sloppy. His email auto-populated on our shared laptop. He'd set it up for a streaming service and never logged out, and one Sunday morning in May while he was at the gym, I opened it. I am not proud of how long I sat there reading. I read enough. Months of it. Its early messages where they were professional and careful, and then the same shift I'd probably missed in real life because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't screenshot everything immediately because my hands were shaking too badly. I made myself close the laptop, put it back exactly where it was, go make coffee, and then come back and do it methodically. I screenshotted 6 weeks of messages. I emailed them to a personal account Damien didn't know existed. Then I cleared the screenshot folder, closed the laptop, and went to the farmer's market like it was a normal Sunday. I called Miss Harrington on Monday. She told me the screenshots were useful, but not legally determinative on their own in New York. New York is a no-fault divorce state, which means I didn't need to prove infidelity to get divorced. But the evidence could matter in the conversation about financial settlements if he decided to get difficult. She told me to start thinking about timing. I started thinking about timing. Here's what I need you to understand about the next few weeks. I was still cooking dinner. I was still walking our dog. I was still asking about his day and listening to the answers and sleeping in the same bed as a man I now knew had been lying to me for at least 8 months. I know that sounds impossible. People always say they would leave immediately, or they would confront him, or they'd never be able to act normal, but you do what you have to do when the alternative is blowing up your own leverage. I had worked too hard and waited too carefully to throw it away for one satisfying argument. Damien's birthday was in June. We had plans, a reservation at a restaurant in the West Village that I'd made in January, back when I was still the wife who planned things. I could have canceled. I almost did. But I kept the reservation because I'd decided that his birthday weekend was going to be the last ordinary weekend, and then the following Monday I was going to meet with Ms. Harrington and sign the filing papers. His birthday dinner was fine, quiet. He drank 2 glasses of wine and talked about a firm retreat happening in August, and I listened and smiled and thought about almost nothing except the folder on my computer and the bank account he didn't know about. On Sunday, his mother called. I had always liked his mother. She was direct and funny, and she'd been kind to me. She asked how we were doing. I said fine. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long, and she said, "Sweetheart, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but are you two doing all right? Really?" I said, "Why do you ask?" Another pause, and then she told me that Damien had called her in March and told her that he'd been unhappy in our marriage for a long time, that he'd felt trapped, that he'd been seeing someone else, and he thought it might be serious. He had told his mother in March, while I was making excuses for him, while I was telling my sister he was just stressed. He had told his mother he was in love with someone else, and his mother had sat on that information for 3 months, and I was only finding out because she felt guilty. I thanked her for telling me. I hung up. I went into the bathroom and I turned on the shower and I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I let myself cry for exactly as long as I needed to. Not for the marriage. I was past grieving the marriage. I cried because of how long I had been the last to know. How many people had known? How ordinary I must have looked from the outside, going about my life, making anniversary dinner reservations, telling my sister he was just stressed. When I came out of the bathroom, Damien was on the couch. I sat down across from him. I said, "I spoke to your mother." The color changed in his face. Just slightly, but I'd been watching his face for 7 years and I saw it. I said, "I think we both know what this conversation is." He started to say something. I think he was going to go for the apologetic version, the "I was going to talk to you" version, and I said, "I'm not interested in the explanation right now. I want you to know that I've already spoken to an attorney and the paperwork is ready to file. I'm not asking for anything dramatic. I want this to be as clean as possible." He stared at me. He said, "You spoke to an attorney?" I said, "Months ago." He looked at me the way you look at someone when you realize you completely misread them. And I want to be honest, there was a part of me that found that deeply satisfying. Not in a cruel way. In the way that it feels when someone who wrote you off discovers they were wrong about what you were capable of. He asked about the apartment. I told him what Missa Harrington had told me to say, that we'd work it out through the attorneys and I was confident we could handle it without going to court if he was cooperative. He asked about the business. I told him the prenup covered that clearly. He asked if I was sure this was what I wanted. I said, "You told your mother you were in love with someone else." "Yes, I'm sure." He moved out within 2 weeks. I won't pretend it was easy watching him take his things. We'd picked out that bookshelves together. The coffee table was from a trip to Portland. Even when you're certain you're making the right decision, watching 7 years get boxed up and carried out the door has a weight to it that nobody quite prepares you for. But here's what else happened in those 2 weeks. I called my 3 clients and told them I was available to take on additional work. 2 of them came back immediately with projects. I reached out to a 4th client I'd been too cautious to approach, a hospitality group that had contacted me twice before, and I turned down because Damien had thought the workload was too much. I said yes. Within 3 weeks I had signed contracts worth more than I'd made in the previous 6 months. I also called the leasing office of a building in Carroll Gardens I'd been watching for 2 years. An apartment had just opened up. I took it. Ms. Harrington filed on a Tuesday in early July. New York State has a waiting period, but the financial terms were agreed on quickly because Damien, to his credit, didn't fight the prenup. I think he was embarrassed enough that he wanted it over. The settlement was fair. I kept the business, my personal accounts, my car. He kept his trust, and his furniture, and his subscriptions. The divorce was finalized in the fall. I heard through a mutual friend, not from anyone who was gossiping, just someone who mentioned it offhandedly, that Gwen had ended things with Damien about 6 weeks after he moved out. Apparently she'd been interested in the version of him that was unavailable. The version that showed up at her door with his life already dismantled was less appealing. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel something when I heard that. I did. Not gloating. It wasn't gloating. More like a sad, quiet recognition of a pattern I'd read about but had never expected to witness up close. She hadn't wanted him. She'd wanted the dynamic. Once the dynamic was gone, so was she. Damien called me once in October. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail saying he hoped I was doing well and that he was sorry for how things had gone, and that he thought I deserved better than what he'd given me. I listened to it twice and then deleted it. Not because I was angry, because there was genuinely nothing left to do with it. I want to tell you about the Thursday in November. because that's the part of this story I think about the most. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting at my kitchen table in the Carroll Gardens apartment. My apartment, just mine, with my dog and my plants, and the print I bought in Beacon 2 summers ago that Damien had said was too loud for the wall, and I was working on a rebrand proposal for the hospitality group. It was almost 9 at night. I had a glass of wine and the windows were dark, and the apartment was quiet in the way apartments get quiet when there's only one person in them, and that person is completely at peace. I wasn't thinking about Damien. I wasn't tracking the clock or wondering where anyone was, or bracing for a door to open or a temperature to shift. I was just working. Just mine. I thought about the woman I'd been in March, standing at the sink with wet hands, being told she was suffocating someone, believing it for a minute, wondering if maybe she was too much, too present, too here. I don't believe that anymore. I want to say something to anyone who recognizes the early part of this story. The part before the screenshots and the attorney and the separate bank account. If you're still in that part, if you're still making excuses and watching the door and telling yourself he's just stressed, you don't have to confront anything yet, you don't have to blow anything up, but start paying attention, start keeping records, call a friend who knows family law, open an account, not because you've decided anything, but because knowing your options costs nothing, and the moment you need them, you will be grateful you already have them. The calm I found on that kitchen floor in April wasn't numbness. It wasn't giving up. It was the feeling of deciding to take myself seriously. That's what I built. Not a comeback. Not revenge. Just the life that was always supposed to be mine. Once I stopped making room for someone who'd already decided to leave. There's something I've thought about a lot since all of this ended. Not about Damien, not about Gwen, not even about the apartment or the settlement or any of the logistics that consumed so many months of my life. I think about the woman standing at the kitchen sink in March. Wet hands. A husband in a new shirt telling her she was too present in her own home. And that woman, me, wondering for just a moment if he was right. That moment scares me more than anything else in this story, because the damage that gets done to you in a slow, quiet marriage isn't the dramatic stuff. It's not the argument or the discovery or the attorney's office. It's the accumulation of small moments where someone you trusted made you feel like your existence was a problem to be managed. And if you're not careful, you start to believe it. You start shrinking. You start apologizing for being home when you live there. What I know now is that what Damien called suffocating was actually just me, present, consistent, not performing anything. And the fact that my steadiness made him uncomfortable says everything about where he already was, and nothing about whether I was too much. People make choices. Damien made his long before I found out about them. He chose to lie to let me go on cooking dinners and walking the dog and making anniversary reservations while he was already emotionally somewhere else entirely. That choice had a cost, not because the universe arranged it that way, but because actions compounded over time produce outcomes. He spent months being careless. I spent months being careful. The difference between where we each ended up is not a mystery. Priya told me once while I was still in the middle of all of it that the smartest thing I'd done was slow down when everything in me wanted to explode. She was right. Anger is not useless. There's information in it, and I felt plenty of it. But acting from anger at the wrong moment would have cost me. The calm I found on that kitchen floor wasn't detachment. It was focus. I stopped asking why this was happening and started asking what I was going to do about it. That's what I mean when I talk about taking yourself seriously. It's not a grand gesture. It's practical. It's opening a bank account. It's calling a paralegal friend. It's sitting in an attorney's office at $400 an hour and listening carefully and doing exactly what you're told. It's understanding that your future is worth protecting before you even know what it's going to look like. I think about the Thursday in November a lot. Wine, work, quiet apartment, dog asleep on the couch. That version of my life did not arrive by accident. It arrived because one night in April, instead of crying myself to sleep, I decided that whatever came next was going to be built on my own terms. That's the only thing I want anyone to take from this. Not the revenge, not the settlement. Just that. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to be methodical about it. And the moment you decide to take your situation seriously instead of hoping it fixes itself, that is the moment everything begins to change.